Extinction Rebellion made the news, an awful lot of the news, by trying to stop the news at the weekend. They blockaded newspaper printing plants, affecting the distribution of The Sun, The Times, Telegraph, Mail and other papers, all papers with which they disagree. They don't like their political stances, they don't like their owners, and they also don't like the fact they're not talking about Extinction Rebellion and climate change enough, despite the fact actually the Sun newspaper on Saturday had a nice full-page article by Sir David Attenborough about climate change, which of course many millions of people were not able to see because they couldn't access their newspapers when they didn't appear in the newsagent. But why do Extinction Rebellion think that it's acceptable for them to basically block a free press in this country? It's because they don't like what they're saying. Well, we're going to talk to one of those Extinction Rebellion protesters in just a moment. First up, let's talk to former Metropolitan Police officer Chris Hobbs, who joins us. Good morning to you, Chris.
Yeah, hi, Julia.
It is absolutely extraordinary that this was allowed to happen in a free and democratic country. I'd expect this to be happening in China or Russia or maybe Belarus at the moment, but not in this country. There were lots of arrests, dozens and dozens of arrests, and yet the protesters were still able to spend hours and hours and hours blocking people going about their lawful business. How is that possible? Why don't the police move these people on?
Well, they picked their time, didn't they, Julia? They picked a Friday night, just after 10 o'clock. Probably the busiest time of the year, of the week for police officers. Post-lockdown, of course, they're extremely busy, and we saw that in Birmingham with all the activity that was going on, apart from the terrible stabbings. So, expecting Herts Police, remember this was Hertfordshire, not the Met, to suddenly conjure up lots and lots of police officers to deal with this unexpected problem is really expecting a lot. You can't just denude Hertfordshire police to deal with that particular incident. And I suspect that's why Extinction Rebellion chose that particular time, that particular day of the week, because they knew on a Friday night police would be stretched to the limit and couldn't desert the public in terms of pub fights, stabbings and all the other things that go on, just to deal with those individuals at the gate. They did deal with them eventually. They got officers from 5 forces, and that's no easy task. Forces don't really want to release their officers for the same reasons. Yeah. But they managed to arrest 50 and 30 up in Merseyside. It was a difficult night for Herts Police, one that they weren't expecting.
No, indeed. I mean, quite cunningly done. The thing is, the Extinction Rebellion always talk about how, this is peaceful protest. But of course, it's not peaceful protest when you're stopping people going about their lawful business. Now, I felt the same way when they were blocking places like Waterloo Bridge in London last summer on the basis that, but I can't get my normal route home on Waterloo Bridge. I can't drive my car into you, obviously. I'm not insane. I'm not somebody who'd risk someone's life. But if you don't move out of the way, and you're requiring me to stop what I'm doing, that isn't peaceful. It does seem that to a lot of us watching from the outside that the police are very, very sort of loath to act to deal with these people, and yet they will act against people. Say we've seen some horrible scenes of a man on a train not wearing a mask, claiming he's got medical exemption. I don't know whether he does or not. I don't know whether the police knew whether he did or not, but being manhandled forcefully by a police officer. But when we see these contrasts, and indeed the protests we saw in Dover by people protesting against the government failing to act against illegal immigration by these people arriving on dinghies, we do see very forceful policing of that. And it seems to a lot of people watching that it's very different depending on the cause.
Well, I don't really know what people expect to do with the Extinction Rebellion. I watched the live feed from Dover. I saw the abuse the police were taking. And they simply just walked the protesters down the road and got them away from the harbour area. There were no batons drawn. There was only 10 arrests, which, given the behaviour of some of the people that I witnessed, so I was surprised it was that low. As far as Extinction Rebellion go, this is part of their tactic, isn't it? They will not be violent. They will be as obstructive as they possibly can be. But I don't really know what people expect police to do. There have been 600 arrests in London, which is a lot of arrests. It's a lot of work for the police. It's not just arresting them, it's what goes on at custody, where, again, most of them are obstructive, and then they have to presumably go to court. I suspect many of them won't. But you can't, if they're being non-violent, if they're sitting there going floppy, the only thing the police can really do is haul them out of the way. They can't baton charge them. They can't.
So don't we have those water cannons still somewhere hidden in a warehouse?
Don't. But even then, all the things, the alternatives, police dogs, mounted police, there will be a huge outcry. if Extinction Rebellion protesters were injured by police, because police were being forced.
But again, if they choose to go floppy and refuse, if they're being moved and they get injured while they're being moved because they're not cooperating, realistically, isn't it their fault? We're not talking about police, not talking about people kneeling on people's necks. We're not talking about firing weapons. We're talking about police removing protesters who...
Well, that's what they've been doing. They have been moving them. They've moved 600 of them. I was there on Tuesday. I spent the day there. I watched the police and I watched them move people, arrest people, put them into vans, take them off to charging centres. It's 600 arrests. So it's not as if the police are doing nothing. But you can't. If police were violent, let's be quite honest. If they drew batons, as Spanish police, I've seen them do to people sitting down. It really is horrible and it's brutal.
Yeah. I'm not calling for that. But just finally, and we are going to be talking to one of those Extinction Rebellion protesters just after 8:30. West Midlands Police announced this morning they have arrested a 27-year-old suspect after the horrific stabbing spree that went on in the early hours of Sunday morning in central Birmingham. 7 people injured, 1 dead, 2 still fighting for their lives. Lots of criticism of the police not acting soon enough, not managing to find this man, also not releasing a description of the CCTV images of this man until 15 hours after the last stabbing. Do you think there was a mistake there, or would there be a good reason behind that?
Well, I think they wanted to be absolutely certain about what they're dealing with. On the night, it's a bit like London Bridge. I can only imagine the chaos. Is it one person? Is it more than one? Is this a terror attack? Complete and utter nightmare. And they've got all those crime scenes. You've got to preserve the crime scene. You've got to get witnesses to the stabbing at all these crime scenes. You had other things going on. You had huge fights at the Arcadian Centre as well. Police had to deal with reports of shots being fired. A complete nightmare for police officers having to deal with a scenario like that. Chaos over the radio. I can imagine their radios, what is going on? And it was one man, but they weren't to know that. So a nightmare evening, really, for West Midlands Police.
Chris Hobbs, former Metropolitan Police officer, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So let's ask one of the people who was at one of those demonstrations. Donnachadh McCarthy is a spokesman for Extinction Rebellion and was outside the Broxbourne printing presses on Friday night. Good morning to you, Donnachadh.
Morning, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. Why do you think it's justifiable for you and your compatriots to stop people going about their lawful business, producing a newspaper that people want to buy because you don't like what's in the newspaper?
Well, actually, listening to the Home Secretary yesterday responding to our peaceful protest, saying that it was attacking the free press is rather laughable. The Council of Europe on the same day put the British government on a blacklist for its attack on freedom of press and its attack on investigative journalism. We argue that there isn't a free press in the United Kingdom because it's owned largely by 3 billionaire families based in tax havens. And that actually has a massive impact on our democracy, and it's actually corrupted our democracy. And the real reason why we're there is because that media has been very, very powerful in opposing the actions needed to tackle the climate emergency.
OK, right. If you don't like the newspapers that are currently on sale or the people who own them, why don't you start your own newspaper? If there is a clamour for this supposed free press that you think doesn't exist, why don't you start your own newspaper? And I'm sure you'd have lots and lots of sales.
Because, Julia, I'm not a billionaire, and that I would have the capacity to set the infrastructure that would actually capture the audience required. It's very clear that these billionaires have bought our press to buy political influence. And I'll just give you a quote by the Evening Standard about Rupert Murdoch. He said, "When I go into Downing Street, they do as I say. When I go into Brussels, they take no notice." And that's the situation we're in Britain, where our democracy is being basically captured by these 3 billionaire families.
Democracy has been captured. OK, here's the thing. Millions of people every single day buy newspapers, their choice, what of the newspapers that they want to read. They don't necessarily agree with everything in those newspapers or their editorials, but that's what they choose to do. Who put you in charge as judge and jury over what sort of newspapers should be published and who gets to buy them? Who decided that you, Donnachadh McCarthy, was in charge?
Nobody did.
So why do you think that you're in a position to tell people what they can and can't print and what people can and can't buy?
But we didn't do that.
You did. That's exactly what you did on Friday night.
What we did is we pressed the pause button on the billionaire press for 17 hours.
Press the pause button.
To try and give the British public a moment, and the media and the political establishment, to think of where we're heading. The government's own climate change committee 2 months ago said They warned the government that we were heading towards 4-degree rise in temperature centigrade. And they said also that that was unadaptable to. This means the future economy of Britain is really at risk. And it's a huge threat to the government, to our society.
Right.
And the government's own advisors.
There's some very big question marks. There is no one credible in the scientific community is predicting a 4-degree rise there in the next century. No one credible at all. That's an absolute load of nonsense. But that's no, Donnachadh.
You can't say that.
No. But my point is that
are you saying the government's own climate change committee are not credible?
Oh, absolutely. They're totally not credible. That's a different debate for a different time. My point is
that's probably why you're working for this radio station, because Murdoch is one of the world's most powerful climate opponents.
That's not why I'm working for this radio station. Donnachadh, that's totally irrelevant. Donnachadh, my point.
James Murdoch is irrelevant.
Yes, at this point, yes. To this conversation, yes, it is. Right, okay.
Because we're talking about climate change, and James Murdoch.
No, we're not. No, Donnachadh, we're not talking about climate change.
That's why we're protesting.
Donnachadh, we are talking. No. You're allowed to protest. Your right to stand outside those plants and to say you're unhappy, and your right to come on this radio station and to have your say. Absolutely, you're allowed to do that. You can stand for election. Maybe you should try doing that. Or are you worried that you can't actually persuade the British public to your views?
And I have been elected
and what,
as a local councillor.
You as a local councillor, but you know as well as I do.
I've also been elected as deputy chair of a major political party in Britain. And is that
the Green Party, or who's that?
That was a Liberal
Democrat Party. Okay, so you've got Liberal Democrats fully on board on the Green message. You've got the Green Party as well. But we know that those parties are not getting majority support, which is why they're not in charge. If you want... Oh, Donnachadh, my darling, could you please wait for me to finish the question? It will make so much better. The point is, it doesn't matter how important your cause is. It doesn't matter. You think this is the biggest single issue facing the world right now. Millions of other people, billions even, don't agree. Just because you think a cause is important doesn't mean you've got a right to stop other people going about their daily business. You need to persuade, to educate, to convince people, as they stand at the standard election, as you said you've done, but get elected with enough MPs and enough power so you can actually effect change. That is what we do in a democracy. We don't stop a free press.
But actually, what we do in a democracy, if we had a free press, is at the moment, two-thirds of Tory voters believe the recovery from the CV-19 crisis should be a green recovery. And what is the government doing? The exact opposite. YouGov carried out a survey, and from Tory voters, they said they support the recovery should be green. And the Tory government is doing the opposite.
Then they'll vote them out. If they're not happy, they'll vote them out, won't they? That's how we do things in a democracy.
They were just elected by these Tory voters.
And they'll vote them out at the next election if they're not happy. They'll send them a message in the local elections. I mean, this is the whole point. They get to do that at the ballot box.
Yes, we do at the ballot box. And what happens at the ballot box? Every single election for the last 45 years have been backed by Rupert Murdoch and his corporation. It's a biased media. It's true.
So are you saying the British people are so stupid and so easily led because we're just sheep that we just do what one particular newspaper owner wants us to do? Do you really think the British people don't have their own minds and don't make up their own decisions?
No, I'm not saying. What I'm actually saying.
That is what you're saying, isn't it?
What I'm saying is very simple. Is that those who can buy our media control the piper controls the tune, and that's the reason why we are so desperate to actually encourage the media to take this as seriously as it needs to be.
I just find it extraordinary that you think you're judge, jury and executioner and you get to decide what newspapers people... I wouldn't try and stop someone from reading the Morning Star, which I think is a ridiculous newspaper, but trumping out an all load of lies. They still have the right to publish and people have a right to read that stuff.
Do you think that it's right that it's okay in Britain for 3 billionaires who don't live here can actually buy the majority of our media and move in and have political power in Downing Street? Rupert Murdoch meets every single Prime Minister regularly because he's bought our media, and that's nothing to do with Joe Public, and they suffer as a consequence because of the power he has over day-to-day life.
Okay, I genuinely think it's extraordinary that you're still. I think this is slightly obsessive, frankly. But there we are. Donnachadh McCarthy, you seem to think you've got the right to just stop people going about their lawful business, stop people buying their newspapers. I do think that the vast majority of people in this country disagree. That's Donnachadh, from McCarthy from Extinction Rebellion.